last year, we also had a conversation which was in depth regarding the Ukraine-Russia crisis. We've been seeing the conflict escalate and escalate and escalate and continue to escalate up until today. And we've seen also President Biden going to Ukraine in the past month to meet with President Zelensky, and with ongoing threats of escalation, nuclear escalation, with the treaty being removed, the nuclear treaty being removed. So our listeners wanted me to ask you on your updates, your current update perspective on the conflict, and where do you think it's going from this point on?
Side comment before I get into it. How many presidents or high officials visited Baghdad when the United States was demolishing it? Zero. In fact, the peace activists in Iraq were ordered to leave because life was so impossible under the U.S. attack. Does that tell you something? It does. Something you're not allowed to talk about. It's called whataboutism. Okay. It's a way of deflecting attention from what is highly important and recognized certainly throughout the global South, but even in Europe. The hypocrisy is just beyond shocking, and it's having an effect. Well, what's happening in Ukraine? The war is escalating. Ukraine is suffering bitterly. Huge number of casualties. The Ukrainian army's been apparently virtually destroyed now. Young recruits, not very well trained, and huge casualties on the Russian side. Civilian casualties, we don't know the details. The United Nations estimates 7,000, which is surely a serious underestimate, maybe twice, 3 times that many. Pretty serious. I mean, it's not Iraq, it's not the American kind of war, but it's bad enough. And it can increase. Now it's tanks, beginning to be jet planes. The American military has, actually Washington Post had an article a couple of weeks ago pointing out that the U.S. American forces basically are directing the fire of the advanced weapons, HIMARS and others that are being used. The world, most of the world, sees this as a proxy war between Russia and the United States fought over Ukrainian bodies. And it's become harder and harder to avoid that conclusion. If the war continues to escalate, Ukraine will be, the economies very severely harmed. Not like Iraq or Libya or targets of American attack, but bad enough, serious, and it's going to get worse. Pretty soon, you increase tanks, jet planes, and so on. Russia will probably retaliate by a harsher attack against Western Ukraine, against supply lines, run into conflicts with NATO. At that point, you're moving up the escalation ladder to terminal war. Putin has made statements, inflammatory statements about nuclear weapons in reserve, suspended participation in the New START treaty. All of this is very dangerous. I should say it's equally dangerous the way it's escalating in China. We don't talk about it much, but should. But all of this is quite serious. U.S. policy in Ukraine remains stable. The war must continue in order to severely weaken Russia. That's policy. Britain, which is a virtual satellite of the United States now, Britain and the United States actually intervened directly last March and April to urge Ukraine not to move towards negotiations, and negotiations were going on with Russia under Turkish auspices. they broke down. We don't know exactly why, but Britain and the U.S. were very clear that we're not ready for negotiations. No, still not. The official stand remains fight the war to severely weaken Russia. If you think about it, just from a practical point of view, it's kind of sadistic, but people are in fact talking about it. It's a bargain for the United States. At a small fraction of the huge military budget, the United States is severely degrading the military forces of its main military enemy. That's being openly discussed now in the United States and Britain, pointing this out. It's pretty obvious. Whether that's a factor or not, you can debate, but it's certainly a fact. The United States, in fact, you look around, almost the entire world is suffering from this. Ukraine most, but Africa, Asia, curtailment of food and fertilizer shipments having a big effect. Europe is declining, even moving towards deindustrialization because of its the breaking of its natural trade commercial relations with Russia. The whole German-based, very successful European industrial system was based on interactions with the East. Now, Russia doesn't have much of an economy. It's about the size of Mexico, but it's very rich in resources, minerals, oil, all essential for West European industry. It's collapsing. All over the world, decline. One exception. U.S. is doing brilliantly. It's degrading the forces of its enemy at very low cost. Fossil fuel companies are just euphoric with the huge profits that come. Germany's importing liquefied natural gas from the United States at far higher costs than it could get cheaply from Russia. Arms manufacturers are doing great. Food monopolies, the global food system is half a dozen companies raising prices, profits going through the roof. It's it's very successful in many ways. How long will Europe agree to accept this? We don't know. We do know what's happening in the global south. They're just refusing to participate. It became very dramatic in the international conference in Munich a couple of weeks ago. It was an international conference, a strategic conference. The United States, Vice President Harris was there, other representatives, desperately trying to get the countries of the South to join the United States in the war. One after another said, not ours, your war. We don't pay any attention to your hypocritical proclamations. We know exactly what they mean. We've suffered from your savagery for centuries. Stop lecturing to us. Just laugh at it. We're not going to take part in this. We're going to make our own commercial and other arrangements with Russia and particularly with China. You don't like it? Too bad. Even longtime U.S. allies like Colombia simply flatly refused. Brazil, no, it's not our war. Don't know what Mexico said, but probably something similar. Asia, India, Indonesia, sorry, we continue in our own way. The United States is quite isolated. The English-speaking countries, and for the time being, continental Europe are essentially isolated. Probably 90% of the countries in the world don't even observe the sanctions. Meanwhile, China is moving ahead with its loan, development, investment projects, also moving ahead diplomatically. It just threw a major wrench in long-term U.S. policy in the Middle East by arranging the Saudi-Iranian negotiations. It's a very severe blow to the United States. control of the Middle East has been a prime concern of U.S. foreign policy since the Second World War. Now China comes, and the United States was working very hard to put together an alliance of the most reactionary states in the region in a conflict with Iran. It's called the Abraham Accords. And the United States were supposed to applaud it as wonderful. It's actually a reactionary alliance subordinated to the United States aimed at Iran. China just dismantled it, took the main element. Saudi Arabia was not technically a member of the Accords, but basically part of it. The main source of oil, pulled it into the Chinese system. It had already happened with the United Arab Emirates, the other major state. China has two major development programs for Eurasia. There's what's called the New Silk Road, which goes through the Eurasian countries, but there's also a maritime Silk Road, runs along the south through the seas. One of the hubs is the United Arab Emirates, the main, along with Saudi Arabia, the main U.S. ally in the region, the hub of the maritime Silk Road of China. These things are all taking place. The U.S. can't stop them with guns. That's the U.S. comparative advantage, military force. But it doesn't stop these things. They continue. And the world is moving towards complicated reconstruction. Ukraine war is part of it. Ukraine war has driven, apart from the criminality of the aggression, major crime, it's also criminally stupid from Putin's point of view. He gave the United States its fondest wish, Europe, on a silver platter, instead of an accommodation between Russia, Germany, to the benefit of both, drive Europe into the hands of Washington, and Russia moves to the east. We don't have the details of the latest meeting of China and Russia a couple of days ago, but what's leaking out indicates probably that the part of it is economic policies, developing Chinese development of industrial projects in eastern Siberia and access to the rich mineral resources of eastern Siberia. That's very likely as Russia moves to the east. Europe sits in the pocket of the United States and declines. India, Indonesia, South Africa, Brazil, they're just going in their own direction, making their own arrangements. That seems the way the world is moving. And the U.S. has one overwhelmingly powerful weapon, violence, but it doesn't work very well in this situation. In fact, the U.S. moving to China, the U.S., which of course controls NATO, has now expanded NATO to the Indo-Pacific region. It's very significant. The last NATO summit meeting declared that the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean are part of the North Atlantic. So NATO is now an Indo-Pacific organization. Europe is drawn into the conflict that the U.S. is escalating with China. It's both military and commercial. And the Biden administration is quite openly, no secret, declared an economic war against China, trying to prevent China's economic development by withholding from them advanced technology and trying to force Europe, Netherlands particularly, like South Korea, Japan, to break off their relations with China, which is their main market for advanced technology. Will they accept this? Don't actually know. Take Netherlands, has the main industry in the world for crucial parts of the development of semiconductors. Are they going to agree to lose their major market because the U.S. told them to? Maybe. If so, they go into decline. If not, the world changes. I think all of these things are right on the border. And the one top U.S. general, forgotten his name, just a couple of weeks ago, predicted that there would be a U.S.-China war within 2 years. There can't be a U.S.-China war. Both countries get destroyed. There's no such thing. But the people, generals, Congress talk about it as if it's a possibility. It's very casual talk about nuclear wars, utterly shocking. You can read today in the New York Times a long interview with Dan Ellsberg, who's now suffering terminal cancer, but still trying to alert the world to the incredible, unbelievable stupidity of even thinking about nuclear war. Totally impossible, but it's being bandied about as if it's some kind of possibility. And Putin's throwing his own oil on the fire. But that's what we're hurtling towards, including environmental catastrophe. It's the most dangerous period in human history.
Wow. Yeah. It's a very, like you say, it's very concerning that we are just casually talking about a nuclear war and casually talking about the world transitioning from a unipolar order to a multipolar order. And like you say, my next question was going to be your thoughts on the China-Russian developments, diplomatic developments, which you answered very thoroughly, and I appreciate that. And it's impressive, like you say, that we're moving onto a world where nuclear war is being discussed just casually, like even among friends, which is a strange time to live in and a concerning one indeed.